Today we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 28. And if we're trying to follow along where we're at in the story here, Saul has told David that he wasn't going to chase him anymore. David didn't believe him. This is the second time that happened. David didn't believe him. Saul said, come on home. It's over. And David didn't trust him. So David actually left and went to Gath, the Philistine city, to live there. And after he lived there for a while, he spoke to the King Achish, and said, how about I live in a smaller town that's not the king's town? And so Achish gave him Ziklag, which if we look at our map, we'll remember is down here in the southwest. And David and his men and their families are all at Ziklag now. And that's where we're going to pick up. So chapter 28, verse 1. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army. David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. And Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. So it's already an interesting start. If we remember, David has been, him and his men have been raiding these three tribes in the south that the Israelites were commanded hundreds of years ago, and all the way up in the time of David still, to drive these people out of the land, to place them under judgment. And when Achish asked David where he was at, where'd you raid today, or what were you doing? He would say, here and there and everywhere, talking about that he was raiding the Hebrews, but he wasn't raiding the Hebrews. He was raiding mutual enemies of the Philistines and the Hebrews. And he has built up enough trust with Achish that the end of verse 2 there, King Achish has made him his bodyguard for life. So he definitely trusts him. David, as Saul pointed out a few chapters ago, is very cunning. Not super honest, but very cunning. Verse 3, now Samuel had died, and we read the one verse dedicated to that a while back, and we have one more here. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him, and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. So we can easily just kind of cruise past that, like it's just in there for no reason. But that is the finest thing, it seems, that Saul ever did during his tenure. But as we'll find out, he may have just done it for appearances, which is not good. So verse 4, the Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. So if we remember, Saul, one of his main characteristics is he's kind of scaredy cat, right? He's not what you would call brave or courageous. He will have one point in his life, it seems, that he does have that. But he certainly doesn't have it now. He sees that they are outnumbered, and he is scared. Hard to blame him. Verse 6, and when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, behold, there is a medium at Endor. So we see a multitude of problems here. Saul starts off the problems by saying, find me a medium. We just saw in verse 3 that Saul put all the mediums and necromancers out of the land, as is right, as is required by the law of God. But then by verse 7, he's asking for a medium, which is not right by the law of God. And what we'll find out later is this specific incident is brought up when talking about why Saul was killed. It's brought up in Chronicles because of consulting this medium. Basically, this is spiritual adultery. Saul is cheating on Yahweh, is what it comes down to. And our God is a jealous God, and he's not having that. So the other problem with that verse is his servant said to him, behold, there is a medium at Endor. They didn't need to think about it. They didn't say a few days later they found one. They knew exactly where there was one at. So it seems like this was just kind of a, the open secret that just wasn't talked about out loud. Very bad. Verse 8. So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, divine for me a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? So she doesn't recognize him. He's taken off all his royal clothes and put on common clothes, it seems like. But she still doesn't trust whoever this mystery man is, because she knows it's not right. So Saul and his men at the medium, they're all gathered together, and one of them is willing to speak up that it's not right, and it's the medium. That's interesting. But it seems like she's only concerned because it might be a trap. Maybe Saul really did want to drive out all the necromancers, and he's looking to find the last few so he can kill them. Maybe that's what she thinks. I don't know. Verse 10, but Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Saul can't make that promise. He's speaking out of pocket there. Saul has no right to let her off the hook for this. This is now between him and God, and her involvement is between her and God. Saul can't pardon that. Verse 11, then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. Samuel. In verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. Now, we don't know what method she used to do this. Just babbling or whatever method that she used. It's irrelevant. What does seem to stand out is she was surprised when it worked. So whether she's done this before or pretended to do this before or whatever the case may be, she was surprised and terrified when she saw Samuel. So when it worked, she had the proper reaction. And then she knew, somehow, we're not told, but she knew when she saw Samuel that she was talking to Saul. Verse 13, the king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. That's interesting. There's probably a multitude of different words put there, depending on what translation we're using, where it says, I see a God. The word a God, I see a God, I see Elohim. This is the generic phrase. It just means a unbodied spirit. Okay, this is not although sometimes it is spoken of for the God, capital G God, God Almighty. That's not in this case. This is a God. And so that there's no confusion, we don't believe that there's, we're monotheistic. There's one true God, but there are plenty of unbodied spirits, angels, for example. But this is a spirit. This is not God or some other God. So we don't need to get confused in that, in the wording there. She saw a spirit come up out of the earth. Verse 14, he said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. Now, if we've been following along, we know Samuel, and we know that Hannah used to make him that little robe from the time he was a young boy. And every year she would bring him a new robe up. She'd make a robe. It's a whole thing. Samuel and his robe, right? And then when Saul disobeyed God, by not driving out the Amalekites. And Samuel told Saul that God was tearing the kingdom away from him. That was directly after Saul had torn Samuel's robe. And he said, just like you tore my robe, God's tearing the kingdom away from you. So his robe comes up all the time. Even after his death, his robe is still coming up. He's wrapped in a robe, and Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Verse 15. Then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. So we'll stop right there. We'll pick up the second half of that verse here in a second. But when he's talking to Samuel, he says, God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or dreams. If we go back up, in verse 6, it says, when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. So we have three things. But when Saul is talking to Samuel, he only talks about just the one, or just the two. He said, get back to where we were here. He says, God answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. He left out the Urim. Now, why didn't Saul tell Samuel that God's not answering him by Urim either? And maybe it's just an oversight. Maybe it's a scribe saving ink, or maybe Saul leaves that out intentionally because where's the Urim at? Where is it kept? It's in the high priest robe, right? Didn't Saul kill all the priests? So there is no Urim. He probably made, or he could have made a copycat Urim and Thummim, and had somebody that he himself might have anointed to be his personal priest. He says, to finish off verse 15, he says, therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I should do. So God didn't answer. God's not answering me, Samuel. So I decided to see if I could use a medium and get an answer from somewhere else, somewhere that's not from God. So I've summoned you. He's on very thin ice here. Verse 16, and Samuel said, why then do you ask me? Since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy. The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. So it's finally out in the open. Saul's already, seems like, known it for a while. He's acknowledged it. Everybody's kind of elephant in the room. Another one of those secrets nobody wants to say out loud. But Samuel, very upfront in his life, very upfront in his death. He says, your neighbor's David. Remember, the neighbor that's better than you was going to get the kingdom? Hey, it's David, by the way. But everybody knows it at this point, right? But basically, Samuel's saying, why are you asking me if God's not answering you? I already told you this was going to happen. Verse 18, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. So, as a side note, we know David is currently, even while this is happening, he is carrying out God's judgment against, or his fierce wrath against Amalek, and that's going to continue. Verse 19, moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. So let's take that apart a little bit. Saul and his sons will be with Samuel. Well, that's not good. Samuel's dead. So that's upsetting. And then we might get lost, or we might skip over the fact that the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines. Why? Why? His own people? If we remember back to the beginning of the book, Samuel told them what would happen if they had a king, an earthly king. They were supposed to have one king, is the Lord. They wanted an earthly king to be like the other nations. And he said, okay, fine. But these are the things that are going to happen. And part of that was if you disobey the commandments of the Lord, you, the people, and your king, he'll carry out judgment against. And that's happening right now, or being prophesied right now. Verse 20, then Saul fell at once, full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. So he didn't ease himself down. He didn't, slide down to his knees to pray. No, he fell at once, full length on the ground, like a board falling over. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, behold, your servant has obeyed you. I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. He refused and said, I will not eat. But his servants together with the woman urged him, and he listened to their words. So he arose from the earth and sat on the bed. Now, why is, Saul is understandably upset. And if we're curious to, who cares what Samuel said? Samuel's not even alive. Why are you listening to him? But we read that God didn't let any of the words of Samuel fall to the ground. And it seems like that's carried over even past his life, past his earthly life. So Saul believes what Samuel said, and Samuel put a timeline on it, and it's tomorrow. So it's immediate. Saul's distraught, and we shouldn't feel happy about that. We'll find out David's not happy about that. The person that Saul's tried to kill the most. And, it's a tough thing when something bad happens to somebody that we perceive as our enemy, or maybe just somebody we don't like, or they don't like us, or whatever it is. And then something bad happens to them. And we see people cheer that on and celebrate that. And in certain situations, Scripture also does this, but we need to rightly divide when the Scripture is doing this because of a victory of the Lord, or if we're doing it because we're happy that somebody else got what we think they deserved. Because it doesn't take a long look in the mirror to find out that, that's also what I deserve. That's what everybody deserves. Everybody's fallen short. Nobody deserves grace. That's what makes it grace, right? The mercy and grace of God are something that should almost, to bring us to tears. It's not something that we should celebrate when we see it pulled away from somebody else. It's a terrible thing. So Saul's having a rough one right now. Verse 24, now the woman had a fattened calf in the house, and she quickly killed it. And she took the flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread of it. And she put it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they rose and went away that night. So Saul got a post-mortem prophecy from Samuel. It didn't go well for him. Now, we're going to go straight into chapter 29, because while this is happening, remember why Saul is there. Saul is there because the Philistine army is gathering, and he's scared, and God won't answer him, and he's distraught. So that's why he's at the medium, or the witch, at Endor. While that's happening, chapter 29, verse 1. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek. And if we can look at our map here, I'm not sure if that one's on here. Do not. All the way up here in the north. So Aphek, way up here. And the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, so there's a lot of them, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. Let's stop there. So the Philistine army, apparently thousands and thousands of them, are marching towards the Israelites. David is part of the march in the Philistine army. In fact, he's so much a part of it, he's the rear guard with the king. Him and his men are the rear guard of the Philistine march. He's got himself in a situation here. Verse 3, then the commanders of the Philistines said, what are these Hebrews doing here? And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, isn't this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. Well, so there's a couple of interesting things there about that. I guess he hasn't been there for days and years. About a year and 4 months. So a little stretch, but nothing really notable. But since he deserted to me, I found no fault in him to this day. So Achish is fully convinced that David is a deserter from Israel, and that he's his servant for life. But the commanders of the Philistines, they don't love this idea. And the reason why, at the end of verse 3, when Achish says, I found no fault in him to this day, it's because Achish seems a little gullible, because David's been lying to him since they met many chapters ago when he pretended to be insane, and he's been lying to him ever since. So I don't know. I probably shouldn't smile about that. But he does have him tricked. Verse 4, but the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, angry at Achish. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, send the man back, that's David, send David back, that he may return to the place where you have assigned him, that's Ziklag. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? He's right. He said, when we get down into battle, why would we want the Hebrews on our rear guard? Because there's no better way for David to get back in good with Saul than to kill all the important men, the commanders and the king and everybody that he's back there with. There's no better way for David to get back in good with Saul than to kill those guys. They know it and he knows it. So verse 5, and again, with the song, the number one hit, isn't this David of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. The fact that all of these Philistines know this song, when the song is about how many of them he's killed, has got to drive Saul nuts, even more than it did originally. It's tough. Verse 6, then Achish called David and said to him, as the Lord lives, you have been honest. And to me, it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong with you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you. So go back now and go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines. So these lords of the Philistines, remember there's 5 Philistine cities, 5 Philistine lords. So these are who he's talking about. And he's telling David, don't get loud about it. Don't make a scene. Quietly leave. Verse 8, and David said to Achish, but what have I done? Now it's kind of strange, right? Because although David agreed to go out and march with Achish, he didn't want to. He doesn't want to go attack the Hebrews. He's in a situation that he can't find a way out of, because his way to get away from Saul was to pretend to be friends with the Philistines. But now that the Philistines are attacking Saul, what's he supposed to do? He's not going to attack Saul. He's proven that. He's not going to attack the Hebrews. There's no way. But he finds himself in the company that's heading into battle. And then providentially, they tell him, you can't come with us. You can't go to this battle, which is the best and only good news David could have gotten out of this situation, is that they wouldn't let him go. So it's a good thing. So he could stop playing the part, but he doesn't. So in verse 8, David said to Achish, what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go out and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? So he's really talking it up. He's making it sound like, I guess we can look at it one of two ways. To me, it seems like he's saying, why are you taking this honor away from me? I want to go out and I want to serve you and I want to fight. And we know that that's not true. But what he could be saying is the enemies of my Lord the king. He may be talking about Saul there, to go out and fight against the enemies of Saul. In other words, hey, when we get out in the battle, maybe that was the plan, was to kill the Philistines when they got out there. It's hard to tell. Verse 9, and Achish answered David and said, I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to the battle. Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light. So he's telling him, don't waste any time. You go quietly, go as soon as you get up early, go. Verse 11, so David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. It's a very interesting situation happening. These are all going to tie together, so we're going to keep right on going. So verse 30, or chapter 30. Now, keep in mind that David, we'll get our map here. David has gone all the way up to Gath, and then made friends with Achish enough that Achish gave him Ziklag all the way down here. And then, when preparing to go to war, he went all the way up here to Aphek. And this is where the Philistines were gathering to attack the Hebrews. And now, when the Philistines said, you can't go with us, all the way back down again to Ziklag. He's got to be tired of walking. Chapter 30, verse 1. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, so we know how long it took to get from there to there, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. So Amalek, the Amalekites, came up to the north, while all these guys and all their troops were up here, all the way in the north. These guys came up here and attacked. Remember, the Amalekites are mutual enemies of the Hebrews and the Philistines, and they are one of the people groups that were put under the ban. They are to be driven out completely. So the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. So it is a very good thing they killed no one. Through the providence of God is the only reason that happens. That doesn't mean it was good for those people that got carried off. Throughout history, we can see what happens to people when they get taken and put somewhere else. Even up to the events of this last year, when people came into Israel and took people and took them back, and there's a lot of those that aren't returned. It's nothing good to be kidnapped. It's good they weren't killed, but it's not good that they were kidnapped. And we'll find that out. Verse 3. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So again, David marched, him and all his men, from Ziklag to Aphek. They get there. Achish says, you can't go with us to the battle. So 3 days back to Ziklag. And when they get back, it's on fire. So these men have been walking forever. They're tired. They're exhausted. And now they're homeless and they're familyless. And they're mad. Verse 4, then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So these people came to David for a sanctuary, for somewhere that these outcasts could get away from Saul or whatever problems they were having. And they went out and they rallied around David. And to the point, they were raiding all these places together. They were living together. And then When they get back and the town's on fire, everybody's just so upset. They're so distraught. They need somebody to blame. And we run into this. Boy, do I see this a lot. Things can go good for a while, but at some point, somebody or some group of people, they're going to need somebody to blame for something. Even if they have to make up the thing, they'll make it up so that they have somebody to blame. Now, multiply that by 1,000,000 and you have these guys with a very good reason to be upset, and they need somebody to blame. And David's right there, so he's the one to blame. They're talking about stoning him. That's crazy. They know that he's the anointed king, but they see how everything's going right now, and they're like, you know what? He caused this. Let's stone him. And what's to say David did? He gave up. He ran again. What'd he do? David strengthened himself in the Lord. Good for him. Might have been writing some more Psalms, right? Verse 7. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech. Now, do we remember him? So when Saul went to Nob and killed all the priests because of Ahimelech, because Ahimelech helped David, Saul went and killed all the priests and all of their families. The entire town of Nob, the priestly city, wiped it out. But one escaped, Abiathar. One will be left to weep, Abiathar. And he, when he ran away, when he escaped with the ephod. And in the ephod, he had the Urim. So we assume that's why David wanted the ephod there in verse 7. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. What a good message to get from the Lord. He says, yeah, go chase them down. You will overtake them. You will rescue, surely. Verse 9, so David set out. He didn't ask twice. He didn't say, do you guys want to get together and think about it? Maybe we can mull it over. We can have a council. The Lord said, shall surely rescue. So David set out. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. These guys have been running for so long. It's not surprising that they're exhausted. Now, keep in mind, even after the days of walking with their gear on to go to battle, when they got back, they wept until they had no more strength. So these men are truly exhausted. Truly exhausted. So 200 of them, they can't cross the brook. They have to stay. So again, these are what we saw earlier. These are what you would call the men that stay with the baggage. That's these guys. So 400 go with David, 200 stay behind. Verse 11, they found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. And they gave him bread and he ate, and they gave him water to drink. Okay, so we have a Egyptian, a non-Israelite, right? So a foreigner. They found him. They gave him bread. He ate. They gave him water. It's almost like that's how we're supposed to treat people, right? Verse 12, and they gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. They gave him a whole feast. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. So this is how they initiate their relationship, right? They find this Egyptian, feed him, give him water. He's obviously near dead. And they take care of him rather than, crossing to the other side of the road and keep on going, whatever else it might be. They took care of him, the good Samaritan. So verse 13, David said to him after they took care of him, David said to him, to whom do you belong and where are you from? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. So this is how well the Amalekites treat foreigners in their land. This guy got sick. They left him to die and kept right on moving. Now, if we remember back when the laws given to the Israelites, If you have a foreigner among you, you treat him as one of you because you were foreigners in a foreign land. So you will treat the foreigner the same as you treat your brother, right? You treat him good. Now, there's other things that go along with that. These people are expected to assimilate to the culture. And with that, through that green card citizenship, you came under the same protections that anybody came under. So these Amalekites, they just left this Egyptian out there to die. Verse 14, we had made a raid against the Negeb of the Cherethites and against that which belongs to Judah. That's David's people, Judah. And against the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. So you made a raid against David's hometown and burned Ziklag with fire? And David said to him, will you take me down to this band? And he said, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me back into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band. So this is all happening all very concurrently, right? Saul sees the Philistine army, which he doesn't know has David as part of it. He goes to the medium. He finds out this is not good news. While that's happening, David, he's not allowed to march with the army, so he's back down to Ziklag. Now it's burned up, and now he's got this Egyptian. All this is all happening. Verse 16, and when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. It doesn't say because of the great spoil they took from Ziklag. That may be covered under the land of the Philistines, but there's an interesting note later on that it might not be. So David finds the Amalekites, and, truth be told, these are people he was wanting to find anyways. So the Egyptian shows them to him. All right, cool. Verse 17, and David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. And not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. So nobody survived except 400. It seems like a lot of nobodies. But either way, David put a pretty good dent in their party. Verse 18, David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. And that's why I say earlier when it says they were eating, drinking, and dancing because of the spoil they took from the other stuff. Well, they might have been happy about the stuff they took, but whatever they were celebrating with, it wasn't David's stuff because he got all his stuff back. Nothing was missing. Verse 20, David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. So, the good shepherd before the good shepherd, he's not going to leave the flocks behind either. He's here to get back everything. Verse 21. Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been left at the brook Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David. So even in David's 400, there's always going to be a mixture, no matter what group you're in. So even in David's 400 that went with him, there was still some mixed in wicked and worthless fellows. And they said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart. So in other words, sorry about your stuff. You can take your family and go, but you didn't help us get it back, then you're not getting it. Well, that doesn't seem right. Verse 23, but David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. No, so David is I hate to call him a politician because it's kind of a negative connotation, but he really is. He's a good politician, right? He said, you shall not do so, my brothers, right? He doesn't say, no, you can't do that. I'll kill you. You don't do that, my brothers, right? He's building that relationship. And then he says, with what the Lord has given us, kind of setting everybody in their place, knowing, hey, why are you more important than those guys? You didn't win the battle any more than they did, right? This is God's fight. The Lord gave us this. Who are you to exclude these people from being able to celebrate the spoil? So David doesn't like it. You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. David acknowledges left and right that this is all the doings of God. Verse 24, who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. So that went into effect then, and it just carried right on through. That was the rule from now on. Verse 26, when David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. It was for those in Bethel and Ramoth of the Negeb, in Jatir, in Aror, in Siphmoth, in Eshtemoa, in Rakal, in the cities of Jerahmeelites, in the cities of the Kenites, in Hormah, in Borashan, in Athach, in Hebron, for all the places where David and his men had roamed. What a beautiful thing. He keeps, it seems like just, one thing after another with David. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. And all David is saying, look what the Lord has blessed us with. Forget this battle and that battle and in Ziklag and Achish, and look what the Lord has blessed us with. Here, share in the spoils, brothers, right? And then to the guys back in Judah, hey, friends, share in the spoils from the enemies of the Lord. It's very good, very good. We'll stop there. The rest of this is going to be a little more in depth. We'll stop there for today and let us pray. Lord, thank you for giving us your word and for allowing us the time and the patience to study it. And we ask that you continue to bless us, just like you blessed David. We understand that these hard times, they come and go, but the blessings, whether we recognize them or not, they never stop. And we thank you for that in your name.